The afternoon had that quiet, heavy stillness you only get in small Oregon towns, a kind of hush that settles over the porch like a soft blanket. I was sitting in my old rocking chair, feeling the wood creak beneath me, sipping fresh coffee as steam curled into the cool air. Nothing dramatic was supposed to happen that Tuesday. I was thinking about simple things: pruning the hydrangeas, repainting the mailbox, maybe baking cornbread for dinner. At 68, routines are a comfort. Then my phone lit up. Richard Thompson. My only son. Even after all these years, even after all the disappointments, the name still made my heart leap like it used to when he was 5 and came running to me with grass stains on his jeans. I answered with a smile, already rehearsing the questions every mother asks. Are the kids okay? Are you eating well? Do you need anything? But his voice. It was wrong. Flat. Rushed. Echoing like he was calling from a hallway full of boxes. Mom, listen. Just calling to let you know we moved out of state last week. To California. We forgot to tell you. Forgot. That single word slid through me like a cold blade. I froze, coffee suspended halfway to my lips. For a moment I genuinely thought I misheard him. California wasn't a road trip. California wasn't, we changed the grocery store. California was a whole different life, hours away, a coast away. I asked if something was wrong. If the kids, me grandbabies, the two I used to babysit while he worked late, were sick. All I heard in the background was packing tape, the scrape of furniture, Melissa's irritated voice saying something like, "Don't start or she'll get dramatic." Melissa. My daughter-in-law, who barely ever said thank you for the things I did for them. And I had done plenty. Richard sighed and explained it all like it was nothing. Melissa got a transfer opportunity. They sold some furniture, packed everything, rushed through paperwork. It slipped our minds, he said, like forgetting to tell your mother you were leaving the state was the same as forgetting to buy milk. My throat tightened. And the children? I asked. They left without saying goodbye? Silence. A painful, echoing silence. Then he muttered that they were adjusting, and they'd call me on video one of these days. He sounded annoyed, as if my questions were a burden. As if I was the unreasonable one. When he mentioned their new apartment, "It's right by the ocean, Mom, you'd think it's beautiful," my stomach twisted. Not because of jealousy, but because of the way he said it. Detached. Proud. As if I had no place in that new view of theirs. As if the ocean washed me away too. I swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into my voice. Well, good luck, son. I didn't wait for him to say goodbye. I pressed end and set the phone on the glass table beside my now cold coffee. The porch felt larger, emptier. Even the wind seemed to step back, giving space to the blow I had just taken. I stared at the yard, the roses I planted with my late husband, Arthur. We spent decades building a life here. The house, the garden, the holding company that secured our retirement and later supported Richard and his family. And in one clipped phone call, my entire role in their lives was reduced to an afterthought. Forgot. No one forgets to tell their mother something like that. They hide it. They choose silence. They decide you don't matter enough to be included. I sat there for a long moment, letting the hurt settle in my bones like a winter chill. My son had looked me in the eyes for months, taken my money, eaten meals at my table, dropped off the kids without warning and said nothing. Not a hint of California. Not a whisper of plans. They used me, then slipped away like I was just another piece of furniture they didn't want anymore. I closed my eyes and pictured the nights I stayed awake when Richard had the flu at 10 years old, the time I paid their rent for nearly a year when Melissa lost her job, the afternoons spent cheering at school plays, the Christmas mornings, the birthday cakes. All of it, brushed aside with a forgot. But when I opened my eyes, The pain had already started to transform slowly, sharply into something colder.
Something steadier. Something like resolve.
Because while they thought I was just an old woman, they had forgotten who ran the finances of Arthur's firm.
Who managed every investment.
Who built the family's wealth and protected it for decades. They thought I would cry. They thought I would beg. They thought I would crumble like a lonely old lady with nothing but her porch and her memories. They didn't know me at all. I stood up, went inside, and walked straight to Arthur's old office untouched since he passed. The heavy wooden desk, the shelves lined with law books, the scent of paper and lemon polish, everything in that room reminded me of the power we built together. Power I still had. I opened the drawer, pulled out my silver laptop, and sat down. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't hitch. My eyes didn't blur with tears. I wasn't emotional. I was calculating. The financial transfers I sent every month? Gone.
The credit cards under my name?
Cancelled. The apartment they had been living in? Owned by my holding company, not by them. And if they left it without proper notice, that was abandonment of property. I drafted an email to my attorney, clear, concise, legally precise. Every sentence a line in the sand. They wanted independence? Then they could have it. But independence in full. Not the cushioned, convenient version I'd supplied for years. When I pressed send, I heard the soft chime of confirmation. That tiny sound was the moment everything changed. I closed the laptop gently, stood up, and walked back to the kitchen. I reheated my coffee, leaned against the counter, and stared at my reflection in the dark window. They saw a harmless old woman. Tomorrow, they'd remember I was the matriarch. And this time, I wasn't going to be quiet. The next morning, the sky over Oregon was pale blue and strangely peaceful, one of those deceptive mornings that look gentle but carry a storm beneath them. I woke up before sunrise, not because of anxiety, but because my mind was clear.
Crystal clear.
There's a certain quiet strength that settles into a woman my age when she finally decides she's done being ignored.
I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, letting the smell fill every corner of my kitchen.
For years, that aroma meant home for Richard and his children. Now it meant something else: clarity.
Distance. A line drawn in stone.
After finishing my cup, I grabbed my keys and stepped outside. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. At 68, I don't need permission. I locked the door behind me and walked to the small taxi that had arrived at my request. The driver, a polite man with a soft country accent, asked where to. I gave him the address of a building I knew too well, the apartment where Richard, Melissa, and the kids lived before deciding I wasn't worth a goodbye.
The drive was quiet.
Oregon trees stood tall like witnesses as we passed. The closer we got, the tighter something squeezed in my chest, but not from fear, from determination. When the taxi pulled up to the familiar building, memories struck me like sudden flashes. Richard coming home late from college, Melissa holding baby Lucas for the first time, me carrying grocery bags so they wouldn't worry about expenses. Today, the building looked smaller. Or maybe I had finally grown.
The doorman, Mr.
Gray's owner, warm, older gentleman who had watched Richard grow from a young man into a father, looked stunned when I stepped out of the car.
Mrs. Thompson?
Well, I'll be. He lifted his cap. Thought you might have moved with them. Everyone did.
A tiny ache pressed under my ribs.
No, I answered softly. I wasn't invited. He shifted uncomfortably and lowered his voice. They left in a hurry, real hurry.
Came at night.
Boxes everywhere. Looked more like running than moving. Running.
The word stung.
I gave him a small nod and headed to the elevator.
My fingers brushed the cool metal buttons as I pressed the familiar number. 4. Richard S. Floor.
When the elevator opened, the hallway was eerily silent. The beige carpet, once smelling faintly of vanilla from Melissa's plug-in air fresheners, now carried the heavy scent of dust and abandonment. I pulled out my spare Kia key I gave them when Melissa swore they would always keep this home connected to you, Mom. Promises. How easy they had found it to break them. I pushed the key into the lock and turned. The door clicked open with a slow, tired groan.
The apartment hit me like a punch. Not because of emptiness,
but because of what they left behind. It didn't look like a family had moved out respectfully. It looked like they fled. The living room was stripped of personality. The couch was gone, but the indentations on the carpet still showed where it had sat. Dusty outlines marked the places where picture frames once hung. The built-in shelves were bare except for a pile of discarded things shoved carelessly into a corner, papers, broken toys, a few kitchen utensils, and beneath them,
an album.
A dark blue velvet photo album I had given Melissa when Bia was born.
My breath caught.
I knelt and picked it up, blowing away a layer of dust. When I opened it, a wave of warmth washed through me and then pain. Page after page showed my granddaughter's baptism, her first birthday, her preschool graduation. My arms wrapped around her tiny frame in every other picture. Smiles I didn't know were precious at the time burned into glossy paper. They had thrown it away.
Like it meant nothing.
I laid the album gently on the table, as if it were a wounded animal. Then I noticed something else in the pile. A soft corner of yarn yellow and white. My heart lurched. The blanket. The one I crocheted for Lucas before he was born. 6 months of work, each stitch done with a prayer for his future. I reached out and lifted it.
Grease stains.
Dirt smudges. A footprint. As if they had used it to drag something heavy across the floor. I held it against my chest.
Not crying but burning.
That wasn't forgetfulness. That wasn't rushed moving. That was contempt. The air inside the apartment was stale, thick with abandonment. I forced myself to walk deeper, inspecting room after room. In the kitchen, the refrigerator, because the apartment belonged legally to my holding, stood open, unplugged, sour-smelling with rotting leftovers.
The freezer was dripping water. A broken plastic spoon lay on the floor.
The more I saw, the more something inside me crystallized. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a message.
A silent, selfish message. You don't matter.
My phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out and saw the caller ID.
Richard. 10:15 Uhr morgens.
The exact time the bank would have processed the cancelled transfers.
I let it ring.
Once. Twice. 5 times. I didn't answer. A minute later, it rang again. Then again. Followed by a text. A very long text. I didn't open the message, but I read the preview on the notification bar. Mom, something's wrong. The money didn't go through. The card's being declined. We're at the grocery store.
Call me.
A cold, powerful calm settled over me. He wasn't calling to apologize. He wasn't calling to explain. He wasn't calling because he missed me. He was calling because the money stopped. That was the moment I understood my true place in their lives. Not mother. Not grandmother. Not family. Just a bank account with wrinkles. I placed the phone back in my purse and continued walking. The master bedroom was half cleaned, drawers pulled out, some clothes left behind. On the floor lay a crumpled kindergarten drawing Bia had once proudly shown me, a stick figure family holding hands, Mommy, Daddy, Lucas, Bia, and Grandma Lena drawn with big hair and a big smile. They had left that behind too. I picked it up slowly, smoothing out the paper. My throat tightened, but but I didn't break. Not this time. By the time I finished inspecting the whole apartment, the truth was carved into me like stone. They hadn't simply left me out of their new life. They wanted to erase me from the old one. I walked back to the living room, gathered the discarded memories album, blanket, drawing and held them carefully. These pieces of a life I helped build would not end in a trash pile.
My phone buzzed again.
Then again. Faster, more frantic, like a small animal scratching at a door. I ignored all of it. I left the apartment, locked the door, and walked downstairs.
Mister.
Grayson approached me, concern etched into his wrinkled face.
Everything all right up there, Mrs. Thompson?
I looked him straight in the eyes. No, Grayson. But it will be. He nodded slowly, understanding more than I said. I handed him the spare key.
Nobody goes inside.
Not Richard. Not Melissa. Not anyone without my permission. His brows rose in shock, but he accepted the key with a firmness that told me he understood the weight of the moment. From there, I headed straight to my taxi and gave the driver a new address. My attorney. If Richard thought forgetting his mother was a minor detail, he was about to learn what real consequences looked like. And I wasn't done being a mother. But I was done being a doormat. When I stepped out of the taxi in front of Attorney Harrison's office, the same attorney who handled Arthur's estate years ago, the morning chill wrapped itself around me like a warning. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore.
Determination warms a woman in ways a coat can take.
I climbed the steps slowly, not out of weakness, but out of the dignity I've earned over 68 years. The receptionist recognized me immediately.
Mrs.
Thompson, she said softly. Mr. Harrison is expecting you. He always did move fast. One email from me and the wheels of law began turning like clockwork. I entered his office, and when Harrison looked up over his metal-framed glasses, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, respect mixed with surprise. Helena, he said, rising from his chair. You look resolved. That's one word for it, I replied, settling into the seat across from him. He didn't waste time. I prepared everything you requested.
Transfers halted.
Additional cards cancelled. And the file on the apartment is ready for inspection and reclaim. They abandoned it, correct? I nodded.
You have no idea how badly.
His face tightened the way lawyers' faces do when they smell legal rot.
Do you want to pursue damages?
Not yet, I said. But keep the paperwork close. He nodded solemnly and passed me a stack of documents. I signed each page with a steady hand, feeling a growing power in every stroke of my pen. When it was done, I closed the folder and leaned back. It was official. They couldn't touch my money. They couldn't touch my assets. They couldn't touch my generosity. Not unless they proved they deserved it. When I walked out of that office, the sunlight had shifted. It wasn't warm, it was sharp, almost metallic.
Like a blade being drawn.
I took a taxi home. Halfway there, my phone vibrated again and again and again. Richard was relentless. Then Melissa joined in, calling from her number, then from a different number when I blocked the first. Texts poured in, previews flashing on my screen without me opening anything.
Mom, what is happening?
The grocery card got declined. We're embarrassed here. Pick up the phone, this isn't funny. I stared out the window, watching pine trees blur past the glass. They had been embarrassed in a grocery store. Good. I had been humiliated in my own life. When I got home, I didn't run to the phone like I used to when they needed something. I put my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and made myself lunch. A bowl of warm tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich. Simple comfort, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I sat at my kitchen table, savoring each bite, when my phone rang again. This time the preview wasn't just panic. It was anger. "Mom, seriously, answer the phone. This isn't how you treat family." I almost laughed. Family? Suddenly we were family again? The phone buzzed once more, a long, trembling buzz that told me someone was sending a voice message. Against my better judgment, I tapped the preview to listen. Melissa's voice burst through the speaker, sharp and shrill. "Mrs. Thompson, what did you do? The kids' school couldn't process the payment, and we look like irresponsible parents. Fix the bank issue now. Richard is getting lightheaded from stress." The audacity. The entitlement. Not one word about the move. Not one word about throwing my crocheted blanket in the trash. Not one word about the abandoned apartment. Just demands. I locked the phone and set it face down. I refused to let their desperation infect the peace I had started to build. Later that afternoon, I opened the folder Harrison had given me. Inside was everything: financial statements, property rights, the termination of their privileges. Seeing it all in black and white made the situation feel final. Like closing a chapter one didn't know needed closing. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because around 5 p.m., just as I finished setting out fresh linens in the guest bedroom, something I did out of habit more than reason, my phone pinged with a new kind of message. A banking alert. An attempted login from a California IP address. Followed by failed, unauthorized attempt to apply for loan. Amount, $50,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. Not from fear. From betrayal so sharp it felt like a knife. Richard, my son, had attempted to take money from my account. Not by calling. Not by asking. But by using my old password, something he must have written down years ago, just in case. In case, apparently, meant stealing from me. I printed the alert, filed it neatly, and emailed Harrison with the subject line: "More evidence. Add to case." This time my hands did shake, but not from weakness. From fury. Controlled fury, like the slow heat under a thick iron skillet. Around sunset, the phone began ringing again, this time non-stop. Dozens of calls. The kind of persistence people only show when their options are running out. I didn't pick up. Instead, I stepped out onto my porch. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and lavender. The kind of sunset that makes even broken hearts sit a little straighter. I breathed in deep. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy on my lungs. It felt mine. As I rocked gently in my chair, a single thought settled into me like a root finally finding soil. They weren't going to learn anything unless someone taught them. And I had just become the teacher. I stayed outside until the stars came out clear, bright, honest lights in the dark. Meanwhile, somewhere hundreds of miles away, my grown son and his dramatic wife were pacing around a rental by the California coast, realizing that the life they built on my back was collapsing without my money underneath it. And I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel cruel. I felt awake. By the time I went inside and locked the door, I had accepted something quietly revolutionary. If they wanted independence, they would finally get the real version of it. The version grown, UPS Live. And I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. By Friday morning, the world felt strangely calm, almost dishonest in its stillness. The Oregon sky was overcast, heavy with that soft gray blanket we get before a cold rain. I woke up early as I always do, but instead of the familiar ache of loneliness in my chest, there was something else. Anticipation. A woman my age isn't supposed to feel anticipation unless it's for a church potluck or a doctor's appointment with a cute young intern who calls her ma'am in a way that feels like a compliment. But that morning, I felt it in my bones. Because I knew what was coming. By the time I got dressed linen pants, a soft blue sweater, comfortable shoes, the phone had already flashed twice with missed calls from my lawyer. I didn't rush. I brewed my coffee, buttered a piece of toast, and only then sat down at the kitchen table to call him back. He picked up on the first ring, sounding breathless.
Elle n'est done. I sipped my coffee calmly.
Which part? All of it, he replied. Every action we initiated went through and the consequences were immediate. He let out a low whistle, like he couldn't decide whether to be impressed or terrified of me. Tell me, I said. And he did. The repossession team had arrived at Richard's California building early that morning. They weren't dramatic, they were professionals. Their job was simple: reclaim the company SUV that legally belonged to the Thompson family holding, the same car Richard had driven across state lines without permission, violating 2 separate contractual terms. Harrison explained the scene in a tone that made it sound like a courtroom drama he himself couldn't believe he was narrating. Your son was walking out with the kids, he began. Lunchboxes in hand, backpacks on their shoulders. The officer announced the repossession order. Melissa started yelling. Your son tried to argue that the car was basically his, and the officer showed him the contract.
I closed my eyes, breathing out slowly.
I didn't enjoy imagining my grandchildren confused, scared. But I also knew the truth. I hadn't created the danger. They had. And I asked. Well, the officer asked them to remove the children's seats and personal belongings. In the middle of the parking lot. Harrison cleared his throat. The neighbors were watching. Of course they were. People always watch downfall more closely than success. I didn't smile. But I didn't flinch either. They have the car secured, he continued. It'll be transported back to Oregon by Monday. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Good.
And the rental agency?
Delivered the official notice, he said. 48 hours remain for them to bring a new guarantor or pay 3 months' rent up front. I knew they couldn't. Melissa had always lived above her means. Richard had always pretended he earned more than he did. Together, they built a life on money that wasn't theirs. Now they were getting their first taste of reality. I hung up the phone and went about my morning. I watered the plants, ironed the table runner, prepared chicken broth for dinner. The silence in the house was steady, comforting, like an old companion sitting with me at the kitchen island. But around 11:30, I heard something I hadn't heard in years.
The landline ringing.
It startled me so much that I dropped my dish towel. Hardly anyone had that number.
I hadn't used it in almost a decade.
I walked slowly to the old beige phone on the wall, letting it ring 4 times before taking the receiver off the hook. Hello, I said politely.
What came next could VE shattered glass.
MOM. Thank God. Finally. Richard. His voice sharp with panic, thin with desperation. He was breathing so fast I could practically hear his heartbeat through the phone. They took the car, Mom. They came and took it. Right in front of the kids. Melissa nearly fainted. I held the phone an inch away from my ear. Richard, I said calmly, lower your voice. What is happening to you? He exploded. You cancelled our cards? You stopped the deposit? We can't pay for anything. We're stuck in a city we barely know because of you.
Because of me?
I repeated carefully. Yes. He yelled. You're acting insane. There it was. The word every strong older woman eventually hears when she dares to stand up for herself. Insane. Crazy. Losing it. I settled into the armchair beside the landline and crossed my legs, one ankle over the other. My tone was steady and cold, like the winter ocean near their precious new California rental. Richard, I said, the car belonged to the holding. You removed it from the state without permission. That is illegal. It's my car, he snapped. No, I corrected, it's a loaned corporate asset. And you violated the agreement you signed. He went quiet for half a second, just long enough to understand. Then Melissa's voice shrilled in the background. Ask her what kind of mother leaves her own family stranded. I almost laughed. A mother like me. A mother who finally remembered she deserved respect. Richard came back on the line, voice trembling. We might get evicted. They delivered a legal notice. They said something about fraud. Mom, did you do this? Yes, I said plainly. The silence that followed was thick enough to cup in my hands. Why? He asked, sounding smaller than he had since he was 10 years old. I closed my eyes. Because you stole from me, I said. Because you lied. Because you left the state without telling me. Because you threw away the blanket I made for your son. Because you abandoned the apartment I provided. Because you forgot I was a person. He started crying, then real, raw, choking tears. I didn't feel triumph. I felt truth settling between us like a third participant in the call. Then Melissa grabbed the phone. You heartless. You're sick. Who does this to their own child? I spoke so softly she had to go silent to hear me. A mother, I said, who refuses to be used anymore. I lowered the receiver a moment, looking at my reflection in the darkened microwave door across the kitchen. I didn't see cruelty in my eyes. I saw clarity. Then I raised the phone again. And Melissa, I added, you should know if the kids need a place to stay, my door is open. But not for you. The gasp on the other end was almost theatrical. I hung up before either of them could speak again. I didn't wait for guilt. I didn't wait for doubt. I didn't wait for the tremble that usually comes after difficult things. None came. What came instead was relief. I unplugged the landline from the wall, coiled the cord, and set it gently on the shelf. As I walked back into the living room, sunlight filtered through the window, illuminating the dust motes swirling like tiny sparks. I had always thought peace came from keeping a family together. But now I understood. Sometimes peace comes from letting things break. So the right pieces can fall into place. And this time, I wasn't going to be the one swept aside. Sunday has always had a certain weight for me. When Arthur was alive, Sundays meant slow breakfasts, jazz on the old record player, and the two of us reading in comfortable silence, him with a legal journal, me with a cookbook or half-finished crochet project. When Richard was a boy, Sundays were pancake mornings and muddy sneakers in the hallway. Later, when he had children of his own, Sundays meant the smell of roast chicken and tiny voices running through my house like pockets of sunlight. But that particular Sunday, the first Sunday after everything collapsed, felt different before it even arrived. I woke before dawn. The air was crisp and the house was too quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. I made my bed carefully, smoothing each corner, making sure the quilt lay flat. A woman prepares for battle in all kinds of subtle ways. Mine was order, cleanliness, structure. Because I knew they were coming. Desperation has its own scent. And it can travel across state lines. I brewed strong coffee, set out plates for the grandchildren, and opened the curtains. The sky was pale, streaked with hints of gold. The kind of morning that pretends everything is normal. But nothing about that day would be normal. Around 11:45 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from the security camera installed the day before. I walked to Arthur's old office, where the monitor sat on the polished wooden desk. And there they were. A dented rental carer, maybe an Uber someone begged for, pulled up to my gate. Richard climbed out first, shoulders slumped, shirt wrinkled, the exhaustion of a week's worth of panic smeared across his face. Melissa followed, hair hastily tied back, her expression a cocktail of anger and fear. Then the kids. Little Lucas with his backpack dragging on the ground, and sweet Bea rubbing her sleepy eyes.
My heart cracked just a little at the sight of the children. Not for Richard. Not for Melissa.
But for them, because children feel everything, even when they don't understand it. I watched Richard insert his old house key into the lock. It didn't turn. He tried again. And again. Melissa snatched her own key ring and shoved a key at the lock with growing fury. Of course it didn't work. I changed the locks the moment they committed fraud with my name. Melissa screamed something I didn't bother deciphering. Richard pressed the doorbell over and over until the chime echoed through my entire house like a trapped bird.
I let it ring.
5 minutes. 10 minutes. Not to be cruel, but to break the illusion they'd been living in that they could treat me however they wanted and still walk through my home. Finally, I walked outside. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I approached. I didn't rush. I didn't call out. I didn't apologize for the wait. I simply stood on the top step of the porch, elevated above them, hands folded in front of me, watching the scene like a judge stepping into a courtroom. "MOM." Richard shouted, gripping the gate like it was the only thing keeping him from drowning. "Open this. Please. The kids are tired. We've been traveling all night." I stepped closer, but not all the way to the gate. "My home is locked," I said evenly.
"You don't live here anymore."
"You made that clear when you moved without a word." Melissa exploded first. "Stop with the theatrics, Helena. We're a family.
"You can just shut us out." I tilted my head slightly.
"The children are family. You two are consequences." Melissa's jaw dropped. Before she could start another tirade, I lowered my gaze to Lucas and Bea, who were now clinging to each other, confused and frightened.
Guilt tugged at me. A deep, maternal ache.
Children should never have to stand between adult storms.
I pressed the button on the remote in my pocket.
The gate slid open, but only a narrow space.
"Lucas," I said softly, "Bea. Come in, darlings.
Grandma's got lunch ready, and your rooms are just as you left them." Lucas immediately stepped forward, but Melissa grabbed his arm. "No," she barked. "We go in together or no one goes in." The moment her grip tightened, something in me snapped, not anger, but authority. Cold, sharp authority I didn't know I still possessed. "Melissa," I said firmly, "remove your hand from my grandson." She froze. Even Richard looked startled. Slowly, Melissa released him. The children hesitated one more second, then hurried toward me, slipping inside through the narrow opening. I stepped aside and let them into the house. Once they were inside safely, I pressed the button again and the gate slid closed. Now it was just me and the two adults who had used me, lied to me, stolen from me, and left me behind. The wind picked up, rustling the trees behind me. It seemed to highlight just how still Richard and Melissa were. Richard looked pale. Melissa looked furious.
I walked closer to the gate, stopping only a couple feet away.
"We need to talk," I said.
"Oh, now you want to talk?"
Melissa hissed. "After you destroyed our life?" "I didn't destroy your life," I corrected. "I just stopped financing the one you couldn't afford." Richard squeezed his eyes shut, rubbing his forehead. We lost the apartment. They said something about fraudulent guarantor signature. Mom, did you tell them to void the lease?
Yes. Melissa let out a strangled laugh. You Reh in Sahne.
No, I replied calmly. I'm finally lucid. I reached into the folder I had carried out of the house. Its contents were thick pages upon pages prepared by Attorney Harrison.
Richard, I said, sliding a packet of papers through the gate, this is everything.
The damages you caused in the apartment. The charges for unauthorized vehicle transport. The attempt at accessing my bank account. The misuse of an old power of attorney. All documented. Melissa's face drained of color. Richard's hands trembled as he grabbed the papers. And here, I continued, pulling out a second heavier stack, is the agreement that prevents me from pressing criminal charges. He blinked rapidly.
Criminal.
Yes, I said. Fraud is a crime. Theft is a crime. Abandoning a leased corporate vehicle is a crime.
Melissa's voice cracked.
You wouldn't put your own son in prison.
I stared at her.
If he keeps behaving like a stranger, he will end up there without my help. Richard swallowed hard. Then his voice, small, trembling. What do we have to do? Sign, I said. Both of you. He flipped through the contract, reading with glassy eyes. Melissa snatched it, skimmed it, then glared up at me. You're trying to take our kids. No, I corrected, I'm giving them stability. Something you haven't provided. I nodded at the clause. Joint custody. Children reside with me until you can prove financial stability and psychological readiness. Melissa's mouth opened and closed like a fish dragged out of water. Richard put a shaky hand on her shoulder. She's right, he whispered. Look at us, Mel. Look at what we've done. A long, heavy silence stretched between the three of us. Finally, Richard looked at me. Mom, if we sign, what happens then? I took a slow breath. If you sign, I said, I will help you start over but not with handouts. I will cover a small, basic apartment nearby for 6 months. No luxuries. No cards. No allowances. Just a place to live while you find real work. And I will guide your finances, but I will not fund your lifestyle. And if we don't sign? Melissa spat. Then Monday morning, I said, the sheriff will issue a warrant for fraudulent use of a power of attorney and attempted bank theft. And with your names already flagged, Child Protective Services will intervene. Richard broke. His legs gave out, and he sat on the pavement, head in his hands. Melissa stood frozen, breath shaky, the panic finally reaching her eyes. I watched them both without triumph, without cruelty, only certainty. This isn't punishment, I said quietly.
It's correction.
Slowly, Richard reached for the pen clipped to the packet. His hand shook as he signed the first page, then the next. Melissa hesitated longer.
A full minute.
Maybe more. But eventually she signed 2 barely legible, but valid. When they handed the documents back through the gate, Richard couldn't meet my eyes. I took the papers and tucked them under my arm.
You made the right choice, I said softly.
He nodded just once. Melissa wiped her eyes angrily. Are we allowed to see the kids? Yes, I answered.
Every weekend.
You will earn back more time as you earn back stability. Richard swallowed hard. Thank you, Mom. It was the first time in years the word mom sounded like a plea, not an expectation.
I pressed the button, letting the gate slide open just enough.
Come on, I said. Have lunch with your children before you go to your new place. They stepped inside slowly, hesitant, humbled, changed. And as the three of us walked toward the house, something incredible settled into the air.
Not forgiveness.
Not healing. Not reunion. But the first faint, fragile seed of redemption. 6 months can feel like a lifetime or like the blink of an eye. For us, it was both. If someone had told me half a year ago that I would be sitting at my dining table every Sunday with Richard and Melissa sharing regular food instead of silent resentment, I wouldn't have believed them. I wouldn't have believed they could change. I wouldn't have believed I could change either. But transformation, I learned, isn't loud. It's quiet. It's steady. It's 1,000 small choices done right after years of mistakes done wrong. And on that final Sunday 6 months after the contracts were signed, after the car was repossessed, after the eviction, after the screaming and denial and collapse, I watched my family with a clarity I didn't think I would ever have again. Let me tell you how those 6 months unfolded. The first month, the breaking point. Richard and Melissa moved into the modest 2-bedroom apartment I rented for them. It wasn't glamorous. The walls were beige. The view was of another building's brick wall. The carpets were old and thin. They had no cleaning service, no car, no credit cards. Just 4 walls and the consequences of their choices. Richard's pride cracked first. He went job hunting every day. 10 rejections in the first week. 15 the next. Until finally a transportation company hired him for an entry-level admin position. It wasn't prestigious. It wasn't high-paying. But it was honest work. Meanwhile, Melissa sat in that apartment crying into towels she couldn't afford to ruin. She wasn't used to scrubbing floors, budgeting pennies, or making meals out of canned goods. But necessity wears down ego quickly, and humility grows in the cracks. Lucas and Bea lived with me during the week. They adjusted faster than their parents. Children always see truth before adults do. The house filled again with laughter, homework pages, bedtime stories, and the soft comfort of knowing little feet were running across my hallway every morning. The second month, learning the rhythm of responsibility. By February, I had turned my dining room into our family's accountability office. Every 15th of the month, Richard and Melissa brought me their budget notebook.
Not a spreadsheet.
Not a phone app.
A handwritten notebook.
Because facing reality means writing down each dollar you misuse. Their first month's entries were a mess: impulse snacks, late fees, random Amazon purchases Melissa forgot she made. I circled every mistake with a red pen, calmly explaining.
Money reflects discipline, not desire.
They listened. Not happily. But they listened. Richard's job slowly molded him.
Waking up early.
Following instructions. Respecting a supervisor who didn't care about his last name. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't the smart one, the future lawyer, or the guy with a wealthy mother. He was a man learning to stand on his own legs. Melissa started selling old clothes online, then offering proofreading services. She stopped acting like certain jobs were beneath her. She cooked simple meals. She carried laundry without complaint. Her anger softened into something closer to exhaustion and then, surprisingly, effort. Sometimes the hardest step toward goodness is the first one. The third month, cracks turning into light. By March, a strange, delicate calm settled between us.
Not forgiveness.
Not yet. But understanding. Richard stopped yelling. Melissa stopped blaming. They began trying. Really trying. One Sunday, after lunch, Richard stayed behind while Melissa took the kids to the car. "Mom," he said quietly, "I found a senior employee looking for a mentee. He offered to help me with certification programs if I put in the effort."
"And will you?"
I asked. He swallowed hard. "Yes. I need to." Something tender rose in my chest. Hope, cautious and fragile. Later that night, Melissa surprised me by texting. "I'm trying to crochet a blanket. It's harder than I thought. I'm sorry for what I did."
The message was clumsy, crooked, imperfect.
Just like growth. But it was real. And real mattered more than perfect. The 4th month, the children begin to heal. April came with Oregon rainstorms, heavy and cleansing. Lucas started asking less about when Dad would be okay, and more about fun things, science projects, soccer games, baking cookies. Bea, sweet little Bea, started humming again when she played with her dolls. One day after school, she sat beside me on the porch swing and leaned her head on my shoulder. "Grandma," she said, "Mommy and Daddy don't yell as much anymore." My throat tightened. "And Daddy says he's proud of himself for working hard," she continued. "He told me that." I turned my face away so she wouldn't see the tears. Children don't need luxury. They need stability. They need the adults around them to grow. And my grandchildren were finally getting what they deserved. The 5th month, the shift nobody expected. By May, 5 months after everything fell apart, the real shift happened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a conversation.
Richard called me one evening. His voice calm,
steady. "Mom, I paid our electric bill this month without help." I smiled into the phone. "Well done." "And he paused, breathing hard like he was facing a ghost. "I want you to know I'm grateful. I didn't see it before. How much you carried. How much you protected us. And then, I think I thought you'd always catch me." I answered gently. Falling is how we learn to stand. He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He just whispered, "I'm trying to be someone you can respect." And for the first time since the morning he moved without telling me, I believed him. The 6th month, redemption arrives quietly. Which brings me to today.
A bright Sunday.
The house filled with the smell of feijoada simmering, the clatter of forks, the warmth of kids running through hallways.
At noon sharp, the doorbell rang. This time not frantic, not desperate, not angry. Just punctual.
Richard stood there wearing clean jeans and a polo shirt that actually matched. He had lost weight not from stress, but from effort. Honest effort. His face was tired, but his eyes finally looked like a man's. "Good afternoon, Mom," he said softly, kissing my hand. Behind him, Melissa held a glass dish with aluminum foil on top. "I made a pudding," she said. "It's not perfect, but I wanted to try." Her voice was calm. Not sugary.
Not defensive.
Just sincere. Inside, the kids burst in first, hungry and giggling. They hugged me tightly, as if the house itself pulled them in.
We ate together.
We cleaned together.
We laughed a little.
After dessert, we sat in the small office where I held our monthly budget meetings. Richard handed me the notebook, neat, organized, careful. They had stayed within budget. They had saved a small amount. They had paid their own bills.
No overdrafts.
No irresponsible purchases. No emergencies requiring me to rescue them. For the first time in years, they were living within their means. When it was time to go, Richard lingered in the doorway. He hesitated, then spoke. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." I touched his cheek gently.
A mother's love is soft, Richard.
But sometimes it has to be firm enough to hold the whole family up.
Melissa stepped forward. Her voice cracked.
"I can never undo the hurt I caused. But I'm learning to build instead of destroy." I nodded.
That's all I ever wanted.
Effort. Growth. Honesty. The four of them walked toward their old, used sedan, the one they were paying for with their own money. The engine sputtered a bit, but it ran. Before closing the door, Richard looked back.
See you next Sunday.
Yes, I smiled. On time. When their car disappeared down the street, I went back inside. The house was quiet again, but not lonely.
The silence felt full, warm, and steady.
I walked to my bedroom, opened my closet, and pulled out the box tucked behind my quilt stack. Inside were balls of yellow and white yarn. My hands didn't tremble as I picked up the crochet hook. A new blanket. Not to replace the old one, but to honor the new beginning. As the first loop formed between my fingers, I whispered something to the empty room. I saved my family. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it.